We're going to hear from Audrey Johnson, who is the Executive Director for the Maryland State Office of Social Equity. And we are excited to have Audrey with us and the Maryland Office of Social Equity. Maryland has been in the house today, showing up and showing out. So we're going to continue on that track of celebrating, bringing the Maryland State into our conversations. I'm going to ask that everybody get settled and have what you need. And I'm going to read a brief bio for Audrey, and then I'm going to have Audrey to come up. So if you can hear my voice, clap 2 times. If you can hear my voice, clap 2 times. Thank you. Thank you. Put my teacher hat on. So Audrey Johnson is an executive leader, board member, and advocate for economic opportunity, community investment, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's appointed by Governor Wes Moore and serves as the inaugural executive director of the Maryland Office of Social Equity, an independent executive agency established by the Cannabis Reform Act of 2023, which legalized recreational adult use cannabis in the state of Maryland. She leads efforts to ensure fairness in the adult use cannabis market and expand economic opportunities for communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. With over a decade of experience, Audrey previously led economic innovation and strategy at Johns Hopkins University and Health Systems. She also held leadership roles in strategy, enterprise systems, supply chain, supplier diversity, and economic impact at Kaiser Permanente. Audrey is deeply engaged in civic leadership. She is the immediate past president of the National Association of Health Services Executives, the Baltimore chapter, a board member for Art with a Heart, and an advisory board member for I Mentor Baltimore. She actively supports initiatives that promote equity, education, and community empowerment. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from Howard University and an MBA in Finance from the George Washington University. Without further ado, Audrey Johnson, welcome.
Thank you so much. I can appreciate the pivot because it's been our life for probably the last, year and a half as we implement. So good afternoon, I'm Audrey Johnson, happy to be here. This is my first time at this summit, and I thank Sarita Wright, who's on our team, for giving us space and working with the team here to ensure that we have an opportunity to talk about what we're doing in Maryland around cannabis. So Maryland legalized medicinal cannabis back in 2017. And like most states, that process did not result in minorities getting a license. And so what they did with the legalization of cannabis in 2023 was really create a process with the intent of equity, with the intent of diversifying that market. And how do you do that? They looked across the country to see what other states had done, mistakes they had made, things that didn't really, fall through the way that they thought that they would, and took into some of those things into account. So they also, in the legalization of adult use cannabis, were very intentional about creating a team to focus on the success of that program. With legalization in 2023, they created this Office of Social Equity, and it really was around creating that economic opportunity that would provide access, and again, result in the diversification. So I'll give you guys some numbers in terms of how we've done so far. Our licensing round was only for social equity verified applicants. So we worked with the Maryland judicial system to identify excessive charges across the state in different counties to identify what areas, what they call disproportionately impacted areas from the war on drugs. And from there, we created criteria for folks to really, so we can identify those that lived in those zip codes, those areas. They may have attended public schools in those areas, or there's 6 schools within the state of Maryland where the student body is dependent on Pell Grants to attend. So we use that as another criteria that could really qualify their ability to take place in this licensing round. So we did that. That was great. We were concerned, as you do when you create anything new, you want to make sure that, you know, the folks with the licenses look like the folks in this room. And so out of 1,700 applications, we did a lottery that was really for 205 licenses. To date, we've awarded 191 of those 205. 84% of those are minority and women owned. And then out of that is 53 of those are Black owned. And so we are excited about what we've done. And now we're on to the next phase. How does this office support them in terms of opening their doors? One of the things that's very critical, and you know, Dr. Mackay has talked about a little bit, and I'm sure other folks as we're having conversations around equity, is really identifying the support and the resources that would be required once they got selected to get a license, right? So you got the technical assistance, you got the education and training, of course, because, you know, as we looked at the business readiness of that 205, it ranged from folks that knew nothing about cannabis, knew nothing about starting a business, to folks that may have worked in cannabis in another state or have worked in cannabis, you know, whether at a dispensary, had been in the cultivation system, in the process system. We wanted to make sure that we provided different ways for people to kind of tap in where they need it. When those applications were, the lottery and the awards were given, we gave each selected person a $14,000 grant just to get started. And that was really focused on just education and training, professional services. Typically what happens in this space is either training and education. We realized that folks needed attorneys, that they needed accountants, they needed consultants, even real estate, right? How can you get someone to kind of help you find the location? So they were able to utilize those funds in different ways. Thank you. The other thing that was in statute that was important when we legalized was creating some financial support. And so one of our programs that we're actually going to roll out next month is the Social Equity Partnership Grant. And that grant is a partnership from an existing cannabis licensed business with one of the social equity licensees. And so really it creates space for mentoring. It creates space where they may get biomass at a discounted price. And what we do, that grant will fund the existing operator to have that partnership to help the state in getting some of these businesses across the finish line. So excited about that. There are, 30, that annually that grant is $5 million. And so they apply each year, there's an additional $5 million. And so we'll be doing that to ensure that even now that they have a license, that there's some sustainability that we create in that process. One of the things I'm excited about, and you know, it kind of came up in the last presentation conversation, is what do you do about the reinvestment and the repair back in community? Maryland was very intentional about ensuring that portion of the sales revenue tax would go back directly into community. And so, again, looking at those disproportionately impacted areas, determining how much money, and based on the number of charges, excessive charges in different counties, they would get a percentage of 5% of the cannabis sales tax. I will say, to date, Baltimore City has the highest percentage in terms of getting those funds. And to date, being probably a year out now, they probably have about $20 million that is in a fund for them to reinvest back into community. Now, of course, as a process, they have to, create laws and guidelines in terms of how that money would be distributed. But as we talk about equity and talk about sort of continuing to move the needle in this space, they're also, required to ensure that the community is a part of that process. So it may be different in different, jurisdictions in terms of how they may distribute those funds, but really ensuring that it's a community-based, community-focused process. The other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on about our technical assistance, our programming, and Joshua's who's here, and Sarita, we have been building this plane and flying it. And so that's why I said we're pretty used to pivots. And then also working in a government space, right? So we are, community facing, we engage. We had an event last night with the social equity licensees, and yes, we are the advocates for them within this government structure, but our hands are still tied. And so I think one of the important conversations as we are in session right now is how important it is for these new group of businesses, right, that have a very particular interest. You have cannabis associations and groups that are advocating, that are lobbying for the interests of their interests, right? And of course, they're larger existing businesses. The same needs to be done for these social equity licensees. And so excited to kind of help them organize and really understand that although legalization happens, it's an evolving process. And so each year, even this year, right, there were, and I'll say attempts to sort of create amendments that would change what was legalized 2 years ago. And so it's an evolving process continuously. So it's not just about application, right? It's really about how do we support them long term. Other work quickly, because I'm getting the sign, is, we have some workforce development programming that we'll be doing. We are planning our first expungement affair or clinic that's happening in May. She spoke a little bit about Governor Moore's pardon last year. And there's additional bill in session now that is focused on its expungement. So we're excited about the different pieces of work that we'll start to get into to really look at the full ecosystem that social equity and what it means for cannabis in Maryland. So I'll stop there because I know I'm really close. I don't know, do I do Q&A?
Yeah.
Oh. Anyone have any questions? Yes.
Brady with the FSIC. I found that when you're talking about billions of dollars, so many times the rules are written with a loophole so that the homogenous population white men end up getting way more of that money than they ever intended, and the people it was intended for really don't get as much. Have you got anything in place? Because I'd like to tell people about how to do it if you have something in place to stop that from happening.
So you mean the billions of dollars in revenue that is done over time, right? So Maryland did cross the $1 billion line. I think it was September. A year after legalization, we were at like 1.1 billion. And so one of the things that they were very careful about when you went from medicinal to adult use, right? There was a conversion fee that those existing businesses had to pay. The conversion fee, as we're getting ready to roll out a program, and I talk about this because we're rolling out this social equity partnership program, and so those same folks that pay that conversion fee would be the ones benefiting from the social equity grant program. And so to say that to say it takes a lot to try to make sure, and we've done it, right, which is why we're probably 4 or 5 months behind than what we initially wanted to roll this out, is that we take very good intention of ensuring and protecting that there's no loopholes. Because you're right, I think even, I talked about the Cannabis Reform Act. some of the things we saw in session, they're loopholes. And so you have to be mindful and know that it's a continuous. So that has been our intention. I think we've done, I'll knock on wood, we've been able to kind of, stay where that money is focused on the social equity and used for the social equity licensees. Yes.
I live in the state of Maryland.
Okay.
And one of the things that I have been talking, I'm a civil rights leader, I'm the president of SCLC, Africa, Prince George's. One of the things that I've been approached by involving cannabis, but we find that African American men are not getting a fair shot. I mean, they're telling me, I don't know, they said they've done research. I'm sorry. They have done research because these are some doctors that are talking to me about the fact that actually people that's not even from this country gets a license for cannabis in Maryland quicker than a black man can get one. And I have a problem with that because I know that black man is not considered the minority now. It's been replaced. I also know that black women, we went up on the scale, I think, under the minority, how we're classified as minority or not. But one of the things that I've been told is that they're having a problem with this because it's happening even in contracts for development. Instead, we are getting like 1 to 2% of contracts for development, which is really a slither, not a slice.
It is. And my background is supplier diversity. So construction and what happens in that space, you're right? They don't get the prime contracts.
Right.
I would challenge of the process we just went through that there's no one that's not in Maryland, right? That has a license, is one of the 191 licensed. So I could speak to you offline. I am almost sure, I'm positive, that out of the 191, it's not someone outside of this country.
Because we were looking at setting up a meeting with the governor to say, why is this happening?
Yeah, I can share data with you of where people are. Yeah. No, I understand, and so I will, in defense of Maryland, our legislator, the governor, we are the first office of social equity in this country. Normally that work laps on to someone else's job or becomes the work of one person. I have a staff of 12, that's not enough, but it's more than what's ever been done. And so our whole job is focused on the social equity licensees. So I will defend Maryland that they have made intentions and have actually, we're living that out, right? There's funding. I didn't speak about the $80 million cannabis assistance fund that the Department of Commerce is giving to licensees. We're getting ready to distribute probably close to $30 million for startup funds across the 191 businesses. So there's a lot of work that Maryland has done in this cannabis space that has not been done in other parts of this country.
So work has been done to make it an even playing
Yes.
field for everybody. Because we know that, one of the problems we have is coming up with enough money because they also
It's a challenge.
a lot of money to get into.
And just to give context, we have about 150, 170 current existing operators. We have 191 that are coming on, and they have met that criteria of social equity. I said earlier that 84% of that number is minority or women-owned. And so we will diversify. That's already diversifying that market. And so, we'll continue that work. Our biggest, push now is ensuring as many of those 191 actually open their doors. Because that's the next. Just getting a license is just the first step. It's a battle because of capital, right? And it's a battle because owning a regulated business, right, being regulated by the government, is not opening, a business that does not require regulation. My time's up. Thank you.